This is the story of Ethan James Caldwell and his wife Vanessa Lee Caldwell. The kitchen light above the sink had been flickering for 3 weeks. Ethan kept meaning to replace the bulb. Every morning he'd notice it while rinsing his coffee mug. A brief, stuttering hesitation in the light, like something trying to decide whether to stay on. And then he'd set the mug in the rack and forget about it until the next morning. Vanessa mentioned it once, early on, and then stopped mentioning it, which he understood, in some indistinct way, as a decision she had made about him. Their marriage from the outside looked like everything a marriage was supposed to look like at 9 years in. They owned the house. They had a dog, a rescue greyhound named Porter, who slept between them on cold nights and at their feet on warm ones. They had a shared streaming password, a mortgage with 18 years left on it, a standing dinner reservation at a Thai place on Fridays. What they'd lost track of, quietly, without ceremony, the way you lose track of your keys and then accept that you always lose your keys, was the particular texture of wanting each other, not love. Love was still there, Ethan believed. The way a tooth you've stopped being aware of is still there. It was desire that had grown administrative, and beneath that, something both of them felt but neither named, a low, persistent sense that the other person had stopped truly seeing them. Vanessa was 37. She worked in brand development for a mid-sized PR firm and was very good at her job in the way that competent people in roles slightly beneath their potential are good at their jobs, with an efficiency that carried a faint edge of boredom. She was vivid when she wanted to be. She had a laugh that started slow and arrived all at once, and when she deployed it in a room, people noticed. With Ethan, lately, she deployed it less. Not because she'd stopped finding things funny, but because the particular humor they'd built together, the shorthand, the callbacks to obscure arguments and forgotten trips, had started to feel like a museum exhibit of who they used to be. Ethan was 41. He ran a small, but respected environmental consultancy, the kind of work that sounds more exciting than it is until you're actually in the field, and then it's more meaningful than you'd remembered how to let things be. He was the sort of man who felt things deeply and expressed them obliquely, through acts of maintenance, through remembered preferences, through the way he'd leave Vanessa's exact brand of sparkling water on her nightstand when she had a headache, without being asked and without announcing it. He'd been raised to believe that showing up quietly was the same as showing up loudly. He was wrong about this, and it had cost him, and he did not yet fully understand how much. Brooke Sinclair had been Vanessa's best friend since college. She was single by design, she said, though Ethan had always suspected it was something more complicated than that. A desire for freedom that masked a more private loneliness she had learned to manage by making her loneliness look like a lifestyle. Brooke was funny and sharp and occasionally unkind in ways she passed off as honesty. She had never been openly hostile to Ethan, but she had, over the years, cultivated in Vanessa a particular vision of what a woman's life could look like. Unencumbered, stimulating, centered on herself, that made the life Vanessa actually had feel slightly embarrassing by comparison. Ethan didn't dislike Brooke. He just noticed, without quite articulating it, that Vanessa was a slightly different person around her. Lighter in some ways, thinner in others. The girls' trip was 4 nights in Tulum. Brooke had organized it. 3 friends plus Vanessa, boutique hotel, mezcal, the kind of weekend engineered to feel like a reclamation. Vanessa had been excited in the weeks leading up to it, more excited than Ethan had seen her about anything in a while. And he'd noticed that too without saying anything. He drove her to the airport on a Thursday morning. She kissed him at the curb, a real kiss, not a placeholder one, and he thought, there it is. There's the thing we still have. He drove home, and the kitchen light flickered above the sink, and he finally went to the garage and found a bulb and replaced it. She texted on Friday, having so much fun. Needed this. He texted back, good, you deserve it. Then Porter says hi, a pause. Then a single heart emoji from her, which he held on to more than he would have admitted. When she came back on Monday, the taxi pulled up in the early evening. He had dinner on. She came through the door with a tan and lighter hair and sunglasses pushed up into it, and she was beautiful. And something behind her eyes was different. He couldn't have named what it was, not then. He noticed it the way you notice the flickering light, briefly, subliminally. And then he carried her bag in and they ate dinner, and she asked him about his week and he told her, and she listened with a quality of attention that felt, just slightly, like someone waiting for something to be over. 3 days later, on a Wednesday night, while he was reading and she was doing something on her phone across the room, she said his name in a tone that wasn't a question but wasn't a statement either. Ethan. He looked up. She set her phone face down on her knee and looked at the middle distance, not at him, the way someone looks when they've rehearsed what they're about to say and are now trying to remember whether they mean it. I think I need some space, she said. I don't want to separate. I just need to figure some things out. About what I want. He watched her. The pause between them was long enough to hold several things at once. Okay, he said. She blinked. It wasn't the response she'd prepared for. He moved into the guest room that night. It wasn't dramatic. He gathered a paperback, his phone charger, the extra pillow from the closet shelf. Porter followed him down the hall and slept at the foot of the guest bed, which Ethan privately felt was an act of loyalty he didn't deserve from a dog but accepted with gratitude. The room smelled faintly of cedar and stored linens. It was actually, if he was honest, quite comfortable. He lay in the dark and thought about the look on Vanessa's face when he'd said okay. The brief, involuntary flash of something. Surprise, maybe, or disappointment. He wasn't sure those were different things. What surprised him over the following days was not the sadness. He'd expected the sadness. What surprised him was the clarity. Without the ambient hum of trying to connect, trying to read her, trying to calibrate his gestures to her shifting temperature, there was space. He woke up on Saturday morning and went for a run, a long one, the kind he used to take before their routines merged into the single organism of a shared life. His phone buzzed with a message from a college friend, Dom, who'd been inviting him to weekend hikes for 2 years with diminishing returns. Same invite stands, zero pressure. Ethan typed back, I'm in. Then he made coffee and sat at the kitchen table in the clean morning light and felt, for the first time in a long while, like a specific person. Vanessa noticed. She didn't say anything, but he could see her noticing. A sideways quality to her attention when they passed each other in the kitchen, a fractional pause before she disappeared into the bedroom or the bathroom or the world on her phone. They were polite. They ate at opposite ends of meals, not coldly, but with the careful courtesy of people trying not to make something worse. She asked about work once, and he told her about a wetlands project in the eastern county, something he was genuinely interested in, and she listened and said, that sounds like something you'd love. And he wasn't sure if she meant it as a compliment or a reminder of how well she'd known him and how little that knowledge had lately been used. On a Wednesday evening, 2 weeks in, she poured 2 glasses of wine and brought one to where he was sitting. She sat across from him. It felt rehearsed and not entirely rehearsed. I don't want you to think, she started, then stopped. She turned the glass on the coffee table by its stem. I don't want you to think I didn't love what we had. I don't think that, he said. Do you think it's been good? Like, in general? He considered this the way he considered most things, carefully, with a slight delay that she'd always interpreted as withholding, and he'd always understood as trying to be accurate. I think it was good, he said. I think we stopped tending to it, both of us. Both of us. She was quiet. Then I've been feeling invisible for a long time. Like you see me but you don't, you know. I know, he said, and he did. He'd felt it too in the opposite direction, but he didn't say that yet. Does any of this even matter? She said, more to herself than to him. Then she made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I don't know, maybe like this story or subscribe or something. She blinked, looked briefly disoriented, as if someone had just said her name from across a large room. Ethan looked at her. What? She shook her head slightly. Nothing. Sorry, I don't know why I said that. He let it pass, and the conversation settled back into itself, heavier than before. He didn't sleep well that night. Not from grief exactly, but from the accumulation of things he hadn't said. A habit so old and practiced he'd mistaken it for temperament. He'd spent 9 years believing that his steadiness was love made visible, that showing up without spectacle was its own kind of devotion. But lying in the guest room with Porter's warm weight against his feet, he understood, with the precision of something finally named, that love unexpressed is largely invisible, that Vanessa had not been wrong to feel invisible, that he had made her so, not from indifference, but from a failure to translate, from an emotional language so interior it barely made it past his own chest. He began, in small ways, to change. He started calling his mother more. He accepted Dom's hiking invitation and then a second one. He read 2 novels in a row, real ones, the kind that left you feeling enlarged, and he couldn't remember the last time he'd done that. The Wetlands project began to feel alive, in the way work had felt alive when he was younger, and had not yet started bracing himself against enthusiasm. His colleague at the firm, a woman named Phoebe who'd been trying for months to get him to come to her neighborhood's informal dinner series, stopped trying. He called her instead and said he was in. At the dinner, he talked to a documentary filmmaker and a retired judge and a woman who trained search and rescue dogs, and he came home, to his guest room, in his own house, aware of something that was not happiness exactly, but was adjacent to it in a way he hadn't occupied in years. Vanessa was still awake. He could see the light under her bedroom door. He stood in the hallway for a moment and thought about knocking. Then he didn't and went to bed and thought about why he hadn't, and couldn't entirely separate the reason from a certain quiet stubbornness that frightened him when he examined it. It was Brooke who told him, not intentionally, or not entirely intentionally. That was the thing about Brooke that Ethan had always understood on some level. Her honesty was precision-targeted, and her timing was never an accident, even when she could claim it was. She came by the house on a Saturday afternoon while Vanessa was out. Ethan answered the door. They had never been alone together, in a way that involved a real conversation. They stood in the doorway for a moment, both of them adjusting. "She's not here," he said. "I know." She looked past him, then at him. She had the look of someone who has decided something and has not yet committed to it. "Can I come in?" He made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table and held the mug the way people hold something when they need their hands occupied. "I want to tell you something," she said, "and I want you to believe it's not coming from a place of, I'm not trying to start something, all right. The trip." She paused. There was someone. He set his mug down. He didn't feel what he expected to feel. There was no heat in it, no sudden vertigo, no crashing thing. Just a quiet settling of something that had already been unsettled. Like a picture that was crooked, and you've finally straightened it, and now you can see it's the wrong picture entirely. "Was it serious?" he said. "Not a question. I don't know what it was. I think she wanted it to be a feeling more than a person." Brooke was picking her words carefully, more carefully than usual. She told me she'd been feeling like a ghost in her own life. And I think, she stopped. "You think you encouraged it." She didn't flinch, which he respected. "I've been telling her for 2 years that she gave up too much. I believed that. I don't fully take it back. But I also think I made her feel like you were the reason, and that wasn't fair." He was quiet for a long time. "Does she know you're here?" "No." After Brooke left, he sat in the kitchen for a while. Porter lay under the table, his long head on Ethan's foot. The kitchen light worked fine. He thought about Vanessa saying she'd felt invisible, and he thought about how long she must have been storing that feeling. How it must have accumulated in her like water behind a dam, finding its level, looking for the place it could move. He didn't excuse it, but he understood it in a way that made excusing beside the point. When she came home that evening, they sat in the living room. He told her Brooke had come by. He watched her face do several things in quick succession. "She had no right." "Don't," he said. Not sharply, just firmly. "I'm not angry. I want you to understand that. I've been sitting here, and there's no rage in it. There's just this." He looked at her directly. "I think we've been losing each other for a long time. And I think you went looking for the part of yourself you lost in it. And I think the person you found it with was just the nearest available mirror." She was very still. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't let them go further than that. "I don't know what you want from me," she said. "I don't want anything from you," he said. "I think that's been the problem. I stopped wanting things from you, and I told myself that was maturity, and I think it was giving up, dressed up as patience. You're not going to yell at me." "No, why not?" He thought about it. "Because I don't think I'm only the injured party here, and because I'm tired of the performance of it. I spent 9 years being very quiet, and I think a lot of my quietness was just cowardice, dressed up as restraint." She put her face in her hands and held it there for a moment. When she lowered them, she looked younger than he'd seen her look in years, tired in a way that was almost a relief. "I don't think I know how to fix this," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm going to stay in the guest room for a while longer." She nodded. She didn't say, "Please don't." That was the thing that stayed with him afterward. The thing that carried its own specific weight. 4 months passed. Vanessa told the story to herself, and to a small number of people in the way that people tell stories when the truth is too complicated, and the simplified version is at least emotionally coherent. Ethan had become distant. They'd grown apart. She needed to find herself. She'd made a mistake on the trip. She used the word mistake, which was accurate but also contained, curated, the kind of word that limits the damage to a single event rather than to the series of choices that preceded it. To Brooke, she said almost nothing. They had a careful phone call in which Brooke apologized, and Vanessa accepted the apology in the brisk, efficient way she accepted most things that cost her something to acknowledge. Their friendship resumed, but with a new structural feature, a subject they moved around rather than through. Vanessa thought this was fine. It was mostly fine. She saw a therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Morrow, who had a way of reflecting things back that made you feel seen and slightly accused at the same time. In therapy, Vanessa talked about her mother, about ambition, about feeling like she'd been good at performing the life she was supposed to want, rather than building the life she actually did. She didn't talk much about Ethan when Dr. Morrow asked why. She said, "I think I already know what I'd find. The man from the trip, his name was Julian. He lived in Austin, he was 40, and between relationships and had a quality of open, unguarded attention that had felt, for 4 days in Tulum, like the entire emotional inheritance she'd been denied." Texted twice after. She answered the first. She did not answer the second. It was not because she was trying to preserve her marriage. It was because, in the light of her actual life, in her actual kitchen, on an actual Tuesday morning, Julian had no texture. He was a feeling she'd had, and the feeling had been real, but he himself was a stranger, and she was 37, and she was not as confused about what she wanted as she'd needed to believe, what she missed, and she came to this slowly, in the way you come to things you've been deliberately not looking at. Was Ethan's specific self, not the version of him that had become an appliance in her life, reliable and essentially invisible. The version that went hiking now every other weekend and came back with mud on his boots and a particular quality of aliveness. The version that had apparently been at a dinner party in October and talked to a documentary filmmaker about biodiversity for 2 hours and come home looking fed, really fed, in a way she hadn't seen in years. She heard this from a mutual friend and sat with it in a way she wouldn't have expected. She had wanted him to want things. She hadn't expected to grieve them when he did. He was still in the guest room. They had settled into a cohabitation that was, by any measure, more thoughtful than their actual marriage had been in its last 2 years. They had dinner together twice a week. They talked about work. He remembered, without being asked, that she hated the smell of the particular detergent she'd been using and bought her a different one, set it on the laundry room shelf, and said nothing about it. She noticed. She stood in the laundry room for a moment, holding the bottle, thinking about what it meant that he still did things like this, still operated on this frequency of her preferences, while formally they were just, what? Roommates who shared a history and a dog and a mortgage? She asked him one evening if he was happy. He considered it. He was reading. He put the book down with the care of someone who intends to return to it. "I think I'm becoming someone I like," he said, "which isn't the same as happy, but I think it's better." She held that for the rest of the evening, turning it over. He'd begun working on a long-form grant proposal for a river restoration project. Something substantial, something that had been on his mind for years and that he'd never given the time it deserved. He worked on it in the evenings, at the kitchen table, with a focus that was slightly unnerving to observe. She watched him from the doorway once, for longer than she intended. He had reading glasses now. She hadn't seen him wear reading glasses before, or maybe she had and had forgotten. He looked, from where she stood, entirely himself. The grant came through in November. He got a call on a Thursday afternoon, and she happened to be in the kitchen when he took it, and she watched his face go through the particular journey of someone receiving news they'd told themselves not to want too much. When he hung up, she said, "Good news." And he smiled, a real one, and said, "Yeah." She said, "I'm glad." And she was, and the gladness had in it an ache she recognized as regret, and she let it be there, which was more than she had been able to do for most of that year. In January, he told her he was looking at apartments. He said it over breakfast on a Sunday, the kind of morning that was pale and still and had a quality of held breath to it. He said it the way he said most difficult things, quietly, directly, without preamble, as if he'd been carrying it long enough that setting it down required no ceremony. She put her coffee cup down. Okay, she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. There was, between them, a long and very full silence. Are you? She started. I think I need to, he said, not unkindly. Not with finality that was trying to be cruel, just with the steadiness of someone who has finished deciding. She turned her coffee cup by the handle. Outside, Porter moved across the yard in his long, unhurried way, nosing at something beneath the oak tree. I've been thinking, she said, that I let go of something I didn't fully understand the value of. She stopped. She was choosing words with a care that was new to her. Not you specifically, the thing we could have been. He nodded slowly. He didn't dispute it. I spent a long time, he said, being invisible on purpose. I told myself it was love. I think it was actually a way of never having to risk anything. He looked at the table. You weren't wrong that something was missing. You were wrong about where to go looking for it. I know that, she said. I've known that. I know you do. She looked at him. Really looked the way she hadn't in years. There was something in his face that was different, not hard, not closed, just resolved. He had arrived, somewhere in the last 4 months, at some interior country she hadn't been present for the arrival of, and she understood this with a clarity that was not quite grief, but was adjacent to grief in a way she would feel for a long time after. The apartment, she said, is it nearby? Other side of the river, near the project site. A brief, involuntary smile crossed his face when he said project site. She caught it. You love that project. Yeah, I do. Porter came back to the door and she got up to let him in. The dog moved between them, bumping his head against her leg, then against Ethan's knee, impartial. She stood at the door for a moment, looking out at the yard. I want you to know something, she said. She didn't turn around. I don't want you to misunderstand why it happened. The trip, Julian, it wasn't because you weren't enough. It was because I forgot how to want the things I actually had. And I dressed that up as your failure and she stopped. I'm sorry. He was quiet for a moment. Thank you, he said, not sarcastically, not generously, just honestly. It was the thing she'd needed to say more than the thing she'd expected him to receive. She turned around. He was looking at her with an expression she didn't have a name for. It wasn't love, exactly, though there was love in it. It wasn't anger or pity or relief. It was something like recognition. The specific, bittersweet recognition of someone seeing another person clearly, perhaps for the first time, at the exact moment it could no longer be of practical use. I want you to be okay, she said. I genuinely want that. I think I will be, he said. She nodded. She believed him. That was the thing that undid her, briefly. Not his pain, because his pain was manageable, was something she could address, was something she could spend the rest of her life making right if there were time. What undid her was that he was going to be fine, that the person she had in the arithmetic of her own unhappiness gradually erased was now standing in their kitchen, looking like someone who had found his way back to himself, and that the finding had happened largely in her absence. She poured his coffee before he asked. He said thank you. They sat together for another hour, the pale January light moving across the table, Porter sleeping at their feet, talking about the project, about a book he'd read, about nothing in particular. It was the best conversation they'd had in years. He found an apartment the following week. He moved out on a Saturday in February. She helped carry boxes. They were careful with each other in the way of people who understand what they're doing and have decided not to lie about what it costs. The kitchen light had been working perfectly for months. She noticed it that evening, alone in the house, the clean, steady way it held.